This is a time when our country is incredibly divided. We are all over the place, and people are hating each other, and the division in the world absolutely, no doubt, causes division in the church. And I can't speak I'm not saying that I think our church is incredibly divided. I just know there are a lot of different opinions about politics. Some don't care, some really care, some lean left, some lean right, some lean back. I don't know if that's a thing. Matthew 22 is an amazing story about Jesus' interaction with the political nightmare of first century Jerusalem. And as we read the story, we're going to split it into two parts. My first point is the trap, and the second point is the escape. So let's start by reading together in Matthew chapter 22, verse 15. When the Pharisees went out and laid plans to trap him in his words. Then the Pharisees went out and laid plans to trap him in his words. Verse 16. They sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians. Teacher, they said, we know that you are a man of integrity and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are. Tell us then, what is your opinion? Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? But Jesus, knowing their evil intent, said, you hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? Show me the coin used for paying the tax. So they brought him a denarius, and he asked them, whose image is this and whose inscription? Caesar's, they replied. Then he said to them, so give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. When they heard this, they were amazed, so they left him and went away. None of my conversations have ever ended that way. One day, people are going to be like, that was so amazing. They're just going to walk away quietly. So they set a trap for Jesus. Why are we talking about this? Because I thought it appropriate, instead just to start a dialogue about modern day politics, to start a dialogue with what kind of interaction did Jesus really have with politics in his day? If you're anything like me, if you've been around for a while, maybe this is totally brand new and you have no idea. Maybe you've heard the stories of Jesus a lot. You've probably heard this story referenced as how Jesus responded to politics, but I've never heard a lesson on it. And so I actually, reading it, as I was preparing, I was reading it, and I read verse 22. So when they heard this, they went away amazed. And I was thinking, why? It sounds like a good answer, but I didn't really understand why did their jaws all hit the floor. It didn't say they went away angry or confused. They went away amazed. The answer was so brilliant. They were so shocked that Jesus found a way out of the trap that they just left quietly. Picture that scene. That is a crazy scene. How did that happen? Well, we can't really appreciate how amazing Jesus is, one, or two, how it's relevant to us if we don't understand what's going on in the background. So, I'm about to nerd out on you for a little bit. It's about to get real nerdy in here and real historical and very first century. All right, so if you're a history nerd, great. If you're not a history nerd, buckle up. It's going to be relevant for you, and you know what I think tonight will help you do like it has with me? It's going to change the way you read the Gospels. Because when you understand this background, not because of how eloquent it will be. In fact, it may not be eloquent at all. The information that's going to be shared, I think will help you. It really helped me. Just so you know, primarily, I'm still getting to the point in my life where I want to become enough of a scholar where I can pull this stuff out on my own. I stand on the shoulders of great scholars, right? So there are a lot of different scholars that help me. I'm listening to the Bema podcast. Some of you are familiar with it. Marty Solomon. Timothy Keller is a favorite preacher of mine. I've listened to some of his stuff. And then some commentaries and this giant, ridiculous Bible archaeological atlas that I have that makes me look way more scholarly than I am. So that's where my material comes from. So, some key terms, okay? Ready to start with some key terms. Hellenism. This may bring you back to freshman year humanities, right? It's Hellenism. It's one of those words that you're like, yeah, I know what that is. Oh, describe it. Can't. Don't know what it is. It's one of those words. So what is Hellenism? Very important for this conversation. Hellenism it's a description of the culture the Greeks brought to the world in and after the time of Alexander the Great. So you've probably heard the name Alexander the Great. It's a good common denominator in history. He's a Greek who conquered the whole known world, right? So the Persians had this huge empire hundreds of years before Jesus. Alexander the Great comes through and demolishes them in this crazy campaign. There's a really horrible movie made about it. Don't watch it. It's terrible. And takes over. And one of the things Alexander the Great does is he brings this culture of Hellenism. It's this way of life. It's a worldview that was so different than anything that part of the world had ever seen. And primarily, it was called the Greek gospel. So the word gospel, we think about the four gospels, we think about the good news of Jesus, but the word gospel comes from the Greek euangelion, which just means good news. Alexander the Great was the one credited with really coining this term and making it popular. Alexander the Great said, I'm bringing you my euangelion. I'm bringing you my gospel. And that gospel was, it's all about me. Before Alexander the Great, culture and worldview revolved around the gods, right? The gods were the central part of life, and everything revolved around them. Alexander the Great brought an idea that, no. Man is the ultimate. And he brought a man-centric universe, which we know as Hellenism. So it's this idea that man is the pinnacle of human evolution. Man, in some ways, is greater than the gods, and we need to focus on man's accomplishments, on what man can do. What you're going to find is a lot of what I talk about is going to feel like America in the 21st century. It's because there's an amazing amount of parallels between Roman Hellenistic culture and Western American culture. You're going to see that a lot, and maybe make some connections. So, what were the pillars of Hellenism? So Alexander the Great came, and he actually didn't have a big army. So it was shocking that he was able to conquer what he did. But how does he hold all this territory? Has anybody in here ever played the game Risk? It's a board game. So in the game Risk, you're taking over the world, and what happens is when you go on this campaign, you crush everybody, but then you realize, whoa, I have no one to guard the territory I've taken over. This happened to many empires, and so what Alexander the Great does is he's like, my gospel is so good, I don't even really have to leave armies. You're going to want what I bring so badly, you're going to be grateful I conquered you. The four pillars of Hellenism were these. This is where everywhere he went, he left this. Theater, healthcare, university, education, and athletics. Before Hellenism, these things were not staples in culture. And to us, this is our culture. With education, entertainment, athletics, and healthcare. Where do you think that's the pillar of our culture? That's where it came from. And people were so amazed. They brought clean water. They brought the first indoor plumbing. I would love it too. I do. I love Hellenism in its way. The Romans brought the first version of air conditioning. Right? The first time they figured out how to move air through a house to cool it down. Athletics, right? The Olympics, the decathlon, all these things. And so people loved it so much, they were like, why wouldn't I want anything else? A great example of this is in the Bible, there's a city called the Decapolis. Have you guys heard of the Decapolis? It's where the crazy demon-possessed guy in the Bible, if you've heard that story, that Jesus lets these demons go out of him into this herd of pigs, and you're like, why would he do that? We're not even talking about that. I don't even know. I need to study that passage. I don't understand it. But that happens in the Decapolis. The Decapolis was the city that the Greeks built to show everyone in the Judea area where Jesus did his ministry how amazing Hellenism was. Because all around is desert pretty much, except for maybe right on the edge. It's pretty much desert. So in the desert, you really need God. Because you don't have any of this stuff. You got to find water. If you've ever been on a backpacking trip or something, you're actually more connected to God in some ways in those times. You're more reliant on him. You come into the Decapolis, and you're like, whoa. You see the aqueducts coming down from the mountains, fresh water. You see heated water. Again, you get plumbing. You're like, what? Can you imagine the first time you ever got plumbing? You can't, because we have no concept of not having it. It's amazing. The theater, the entertainment, the athletics, the excitement, you really forget that you even need God. And this is just a picture of one of the Roman aqueducts. There's still a lot of them, and they're incredible. So the Greeks brought all this stuff. There's going to be a lot of paper on the ground. And eventually, after many interesting parts of history, the Romans would come through, and eventually they take over. Now, there's pieces in history there. If you're a history buff, you're dying with how many important things I skipped, but we don't have time. What you need to know is the Romans were just as Hellenistic, if not more so, than the Greeks. But not only did the Romans continue that Hellenistic culture of the love of luxury and these four pillars in the man-centric universe, they also brought the concept of Caesar. And you guys probably have seen that sculpture before. It's Julius Caesar who introduced the idea of an emperor. The Romans didn't just believe their emperor was a king, they believed he was a god. And I'll prove that to you with archaeology before the night's done. It was essential in Rome that his subjects worshiped him as a god. So what do we have here? We have Hellenism, the Greeks' man-centric gospel, characterized by luxury they'd never seen before, and then the Romans' view of Caesar, their god-king worship. How do the Jews respond to this? That's the question. That's where it gets really political. How did the Jews, the Israelites that were in the place, respond to this Greek and Roman occupation? Well, they responded in 5 ways. And what I'm going to share with you now are the 5 groups of Jews that split off from each other in response to Hellenism and Roman culture. You with me? I know this is exciting. It actually is really exciting. Okay, so first, you probably heard this group before, the Sadducees. So the Sadducees were a family of priests dating all the way back to what's known as the Levitical priesthood. The Levites. If you've read the Old Testament very much, you know that the Levites were the family of priests charged by God with being the chief priests and kind of the holy connection between man and God. The Sadducees were descended from them. Okay, so they had legitimacy. After Alexander the Great died, before the Romans come, the Jews overthrow Alexander the Great's successors. So the Greeks are there, they're in Jerusalem, they're doing their thing. The Jews rise up and kill them and throw them out. And for 100 years, the Jews rule themselves in Judea. And during that time, the Sadducees were the priests that were leading the way. But what happens is, in that time, in just a few decades, the Sadducees fall in love with Hellenism because it was already a staple of Jerusalem in Judea. And they become incredibly corrupt. The Sadducees are the ones that are really credited with killing Jesus. What you'll find is that Jesus was with the Pharisees for 3 years, and they tried to kill him a couple times, but mostly they just fought him. Jesus was with the Sadducees for a week, and he got killed by them. That's what historians say. The Sadducees are the real bad guy of the New Testament. The Pharisees are bad. The Sadducees are way worse. I heard them described as Jerusalem's version of the mafia. Think assassinations. Think everything that goes with any crime show where there's a mafia overlord. Those are the Sadducees, and they have complete control of this area for about 100 years. They become known as the chief priests. So when you read the New Testament about the chief priests, you're reading about Sadducees, okay? So keep that in mind when you're reading. Hellenism fed their corruption because they love the luxury. And so if you were asking the Sadducees, hey, what should we do about Rome, about Roman occupation? They would say Rome has our full support. Because when the Romans came in to take over, they embraced them in a way. Okay, I'm skipping over some history, but they wanted it to work because they loved what Rome provided them. And they were willing to honor Caesar if it meant keeping their power. So you have the Sadducean mafia, you could say. Second group. The second response to Hellenism are the Herodians. You heard it mentioned 2 or 3 times in the New Testament. The Herodians were very much like the Sadducees, except they weren't priests. So the Sadducees were priests, the Herodians were not, but they loved the luxury of Hellenism. So these were people who believed that they could enjoy the comforts of Hellenism without compromising their worship of God. I think what you'll find as I describe Herodians is that we relate more to the Herodians than any other of these groups, because they loved the luxury but felt they could also worship God at the same time. They loved what the lifestyle afforded them, the worldview. An example is how the Herodians loved their art. So one thing that's important about this time is that having an image of gods was a no-no for Jews. And we're going to read that later. You didn't do that. And the Herodians, we have architecture of a Herodian house that has mosaics, which is like tile paintings, of pagan gods. And the Herodians would have said, oh, that's not idolatry. I'm just enjoying the art. Like, I'm able to enjoy this without compromising my faith. So you can see how that's changing now, the way the Jews are thinking about these things that have been important to them for a long time. They would be the people who said, don't you love what Herod has done with that Roman aqueduct? Have you seen the marble in the temple? Oh, it's gorgeous. Did you see the show down at the theater? Like, that's the kind of people they would be. It sounds familiar because it's us. We connect to the Herodians. And they're, of course, not all the same. They supported and had loyalties with King Herod, who was a big Roman supporter at the time. Think of Matthew the tax collector. Okay, he's a good example of a Herodian. He sold out his Jewish people to fully embrace the Roman rule. He's a Herodian. And people would have thought him as a sellout. If you were to ask the Herodians, hey, what do we do about Rome? They would say, man, we love Rome, and we can make it work. We'll make it work. We can worship God and be Roman. The last three, are all examples of Jews who responded very differently than the Sadducees and the Herodians. They would all reject it in their own way. All three hated the compromise of the Sadducees and the Herodians, would have looked at them as sellouts and traitors to Yahweh. Okay? So keep that in mind as we describe the next three groups. The first are the Zealots. So think Simon the Zealot. He was one of the apostles, right? The Zealots were ultra-devoted Jews that rejected the compromise of the Sadducees and the Herodians, and they were devoted to what was called retributive justice. And meant they believed they could bring God's kingdom with the sword. They were incredibly violent and incredibly committed. An example of this is that there are stories of many revolts in Jewish history. One of them, about 10 to 12,000 Jews, men, women, children, holed up in this mountain fortress that the Romans were attacking. And after months of fighting, the Romans get in. 5,000 Jews died in the fighting, and the other 5,000, all women, children, men, jumped off the cliff and committed suicide rather than being caught by the Romans. Those are the kind of people that you're talking about when you say zealots. So it's not just like, they're super fired up. No, I mean, they're super fired up. And their mantra was, what do you do about Rome? You kill them. In fact, we have facts that one of the mantras of the Zealots was, if you see a Roman alone, a soldier, you kill them. No matter the circumstance, you always kill them. Whoa. These are pretty intense people. I don't know what Jesus did to chill Simon out, but he made it work. Maybe there's a reason we only have one apostle that's a zealot, officially, right? Maybe he could only handle one of them. So you have the very violent Zealots, and then you have the Essenes. Has anybody in here ever heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls? So super famous archaeological find that was made, I think about 60 years ago. The Essenes are responsible for the Dead Sea Scrolls. And what they did is they hated the corruption too. But instead of fighting it and dealing with it, they just went into the desert. And they just left. And they created their own basically the first monastic community, like a monastery. They're like, so if you ask them, what should you do about Rome? They'd be like, who's Rome? They would know, but that would be that has no practical implications for them because they're out in the desert and no one cares about them. And that's how they liked it. Incredibly devoted to the text and walking the way of God, but not around the people. Okay? And then finally, the Pharisees. Right? I saved them, in some ways, the best for last. So the Pharisees, they saw the corruption and they traveled north when the Sadducees took over. And you probably heard of the town of Nazareth. Right? Nazareth was a Pharisee town. Bethsaida, Capernaum, if you're familiar with the New Testament, those towns ring bells in your mind. Super ultra devoted Jews that rejected the compromise of the Hellenists, but they were devoted with absolute obedience rather than violence or running away. So you can see how they are both very different than the Zealots or the Essenes. Because they stuck it out. And this is going to help you understand the Pharisees better. Because the Pharisees get a really bad rap, and to a certain degree they should, but maybe they get it worse than they should in the Bible. These people had the zeal of the Zealots without the conviction about violence. So if you ask them, what do we do about Rome? They would say, you're asking the wrong question. God will deal with Rome. You focus on obedience to Yahweh and righteousness by obedience to the Torah. Torah is the Old Testament command, and Yahweh is what the Old Testament adherents called God. That was his name. Their belief was that if you were obedient enough to God as a nation, God would take care of the foreign occupation, like he did with the Assyrians, like he did with the Babylonians, like he's always done in history. So that's why they were so hard on sinners. That's why they hated tax collectors and the prostitutes, and that's why they hated the Sadducees and they hated the Herodians, because in their mind, those are the reason the Romans are still here. It's not the Romans, it's the sinning Jews. And if the sinning Jews would get their act together and stop sinning and follow the rules like us, the Romans would be kicked out because God would take care of it. Does that make sense? It helps you understand the Pharisees better. What's interesting about the Pharisees, just a side note, notice how Jesus spends more time with the Pharisees than any other of these groups by far. Why is that? I think he wanted to minister to them the most, because my belief is that the Pharisees were the best shot to change the world. They were the closest. You know what Jesus always calls the Pharisees out on? Two things. One, they were hypocrites. They didn't understand the heart of the law. And two, they lacked compassion. If they had compassion, they would have changed the world. But they didn't. And so they didn't. So you have 5 responses to Jesus, to Hellenism, right? So I know we took 20 minutes to do that. This is super important. It's going to inform everything else we talk about, okay? So just in summary, who opposes Rome and who supports Rome? The Zealots and the Essenes oppose Rome in their own extreme ways. The Sadducees and the Herodians support Rome. And I would say the Pharisees lean towards Roman opposition, but sort of also are in bed with them. You see them serving on the Sanhedrin. They're around. There's corruption in the Pharisees, but a lot less than the Sadducees. So are you with me so far? Like, maybe you're starting to see the political picture here. It's all about how they felt about the state of Rome, how they felt about Caesar, how they felt about the Roman worldview. So, what's the deal with this tax? Now that we have all that out of the way, what do they ask Jesus? They say, they're tricky about it. They try to flatter him. Did you catch that on the front end? Oh, Jesus, you're the best. We know you don't care about people, blah, blah, blah. Jesus is like, blah, blah, blah. And then they say, that's not actual textual, blah, blah, blah. But I like to think that Jesus is like, I already know where you're going. Just get there. And they trap him. How is this a trap? They bring up this tax. Is it right to pay the imperial tax? What's hard is that because we don't know what the tax is or what a trigger word this is, we don't connect to why it was a trap. But I'll explain it to you and we'll understand. So this tax was what's called a head tax or a poll tax. And basically what you did is, if you were not a Roman citizen, every single person that lived in this area had to pay a very small sum of money, like maybe a day's wage for a poor person, to acknowledge that they were citizens of Rome and that they submitted to the leadership of Caesar and to his godship, basically. That's how the Jews thought about it. And basically, if you guys have ever heard of tribute before, if a conquering nation, let's say Alexander the Great conquers Syria, just for the privilege of living, pays Alexander the Great, or else he comes and destroys them. In a lot of ways, some translations translate this as the tribute tax. So the Jews were told, the Romans are like, you're welcome for letting you live. You're welcome for letting you serve us. That was the idea. And so you can see why people didn't like that. Here's the next level why they didn't like it. This is that's the coin, by the way. That's an actual denarius right there. This is what it said on the inscription. Tiberius Caesar, son of the god Augustus, Pontifex Maximus, high priest. So on that, it calls Caesar king, son of God, and high priest. Sound familiar? Aren't those all Jesus' titles? So the Jews have this incredibly idolatrous piece of metal. Jews weren't even allowed to use this money in the temple. And if you brought one into the temple, it would have been very frowned upon. It would have been against the Pharisaic law. You couldn't use the denarius to buy a goat, for example, and bring it to the temple. It wouldn't work like that. There's an irony about that later. But all the things the Jews rejected, if you don't know the commands, I'm going to show them to you. In Exodus 20, verses 3 and 4, in the 10 Commandments. very, very famous. You shall have no other gods before me. Whoa, we have a problem. That's the first commandment. What does Caesar call himself? He calls himself God. Worship me as God. We have a major problem. What else does he say? You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven or on earth. You shall not bow down and worship them. That's the second one. We're in really big trouble. What do? How can I pay this tax that acknowledges Caesar is God and still follow Yahweh when I'm rejecting the first two commands? A lot of Jews interpreted it like that. Now, the Herodians didn't, right? The Sadducees didn't. They're like, we can make this work. But the Pharisees were mixed. The Essenes were like, I'm out. What tax are you talking about? I'm in the desert. The Zealots are like, I'm going to kill them all. Right? And so they all respond differently to this tax. Really important background on the tax is that 25 years before this question is asked of Jesus was when this tax was first instituted, I believe under the reign of Octavian, who was Julius Caesar's nephew, his successor. So it's Julius Caesar, and he gets betrayed in this really epic, crazy way. And then his successor is Octavian, who was the emperor when Jesus was born. Okay? So he instituted this tax, and then eventually his son would pick it up, Tiberius. 25 years ago when it was instituted, there was an insane rebellion in Jerusalem. A guy named Judas the Galilean called on all Jews to refuse to pay the tax. And now you can understand why, right? Like, nope, do not pay that tax. In fact, and this is obviously a zealot, he cleansed the temple, killed all the Romans and foreigners, and he said God alone is our leader. And he tried to institute a theocracy that paid no tax to Caesar. He was very soon crushed by the Romans and killed and executed. So this tax inflamed the Jews. Why? Because Caesar claimed he owned them and he was their God. So what was the trap? Let's look back at the verse again. You guys still with me? Matthew 22, look at what happens here. Tell us then, verse 17, what is your opinion? Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? So they have Jesus in a bind. Now that you know all the political players, how do you think people want him to respond? Well, you know the Herodians and the Sadducees would pay the tax, right? Sadducees are embedded with the Romans, so the Herodians. They're like, yeah, pay the tax, it's great. But how are the Zealots going to respond to this tax? Kill them all. How are the Essenes going to respond? Don't know about that tax. Pharisees, it's a mixed bag. It depends on the level of corruption. So they say to Jesus, so what do we do about Rome? The same question all these other Jews responded to. What they're really asking him is, are you a revolutionary? Are you a revolutionary, Jesus? Because the last guy that came here claiming to bring a kingdom, cleansing the temple, what did he do? Well, he claimed he was bringing a new kingdom, and then he got killed by the Romans. And so you see that by asking him this, if Jesus says, do not pay the tax, now what's happening? Well, now he's advocating for an uprising. Now Rome crushes him. Do you see that? If he actively says, the guy who's been walking around for years singing, I'm bringing a new kingdom, if then he says, now don't pay that tax, he's now planting his flag, I'm against Rome, and Rome now has free reign to go kill him. That's what they want, because they want him out. So he's stuck there. And look at what they say in John 12 during his crucifixion. Pilate's trying to save Jesus. And they say, if you let this man go, you are no friend to Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar. What was Jesus claiming? To be the king of the Jews. He had just gone through a week ago, and all of Jerusalem was saying, hail, king of the Jews. You think the Romans didn't have a problem with this? They had a big problem with this. You think the Sadducees didn't have a problem with this? Yeah, now you can see why maybe a little bit more. Jesus, are you a revolutionary? If he says don't pay the tax, he's crushed by the Romans. If he says pay the tax, he's been blowing smoke for 3 years. Because all this stuff about this new kingdom and the new king that's going to come, now he's saying, oh, just submit to Caesar. Just give him your allegiance. What? He can't say that, or he loses the people. So you see the pickle they've got him in. What does he do? It's a perfect trap. They've boxed him in. And even their questioners were very carefully chosen. Consider the questioners. Who went to go talk to him? The Pharisees and the Herodians. What are they doing together? What are they doing together? They hate each other. They hate Jesus more. And so together they go to attack him. So you see, no matter what Jesus does, how do you get out of this? Now, what would the politician do? He would evade. She would evade. Well, it just, I don't know. Have you ever watched politics very much? You're like, oh, just answer the question. We already know what you think. Just tell me, say it out loud. You think he's going to evade, but he doesn't. Let's talk about his escape. Oh, this is awesome. Look at verse 18. But Jesus, knowing their evil intent, said, "You hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? Show me the coin used for paying the tax." So they brought him a denarius, which is hilarious because they're in the temple. What shouldn't a Jew have in the temple? So you can imagine Jesus saying, "Oh, who's got a denarius?" And one of the Jews being like, and you see Jesus kind of winking at him when he takes it. Like, what are you doing with that? It'd be like if someone said, "Oh, Kyle, preacher, is it wrong to look at pornography?" And I'm like, "Well, show me a dirty magazine and we'll talk about it." Oh, okay. So Jesus, off the top, exposes their hypocrisy. Now, of course, we wouldn't know that, but when we read into it, we're like, whoa, Jesus is so awesome. Keep going. And he asked them, whose image and inscription is on this? Caesar's. And then he drops the mic, like in a moment fit for a poetry slam. He says, "So give back to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's." When they heard this, they were amazed. They left him and went away. What did he say? What did he say there? This is what he says. He says, at this phrase, he says, "Give back to Caesar what Caesar's." This is Caesar's money, literally, like minted out of Caesar's wealth. His inscription is on it, his image. Give him the money. And so, they're like, we got him. We got him. If you pay this tax, you are no longer the revolutionary that you've been saying you sort of are. You're not the king, really. You're just another pawn of Caesar, and you've been blowing smoke for years. The people won't follow you. But before they can even breathe it out, he said, and give to God what is God's. And that's the moment they would have been like, they would have not seen it coming. They wouldn't have known what to do with it. What did he mean? He said, don't resist Caesar in paying him his money, but don't you dare give him your allegiance. He doesn't deserve it. It doesn't belong to him. Notice how he says, what image is on this inscription? What does that remind you of? Whose image are we made in? Not Caesar's. You can go all the way back to Genesis to find that. We're made in God's image. Who do you belong to? That's what he's saying. This money belongs to Caesar, but you belong to God. That's a revolutionary statement, brilliantly stated. Caesar didn't just simply demand that their subjects paid him money. They demanded that he call him king. Jesus is very thoughtful about the words he used. He says, look, give Caesar his money, but you never give him your allegiance. You give God your allegiance. Only God owns your heart. He's the ultimate. He says, don't fight Caesar, but fight Caesar. Don't resist him, but resist him. Pay it, even the language, the verb used. So when the Jews, the Herodians and the Pharisees go to Jesus, they say, what should we pay to Caesar? Jesus uses a different verb. He uses the word that's translated pay back. So he doesn't say, oh, just give Caesar this gift. He says, pay back to Caesar what's due to him. They would have understood it as kind of a double meaning. One, it means give him his money, but also, shouldn't a tyrant be resisted a little bit? If someone's a tyrant, shouldn't we resist him? That's what he's telling them, but he's not telling them that, but he is. Do you see that? There's a lot going on here that we miss, but the Jews would have been going through their heads. They'd been like, whoa, he just got out of all of it, and we're walking away quiet. Jesus' answer challenges all 5 Jewish groups to the core, and we're going to end with this thought, okay? And then one additional thought right after this, so 2 thoughts. He rejects those, he challenges those who rejected and openly rebelled. So the Essenes and the Zealots, how would they have heard this? Jesus clearly isn't revolting. He didn't say don't pay the tax. He's not running away from the politics of his day. He's not just going to create a monastery. If he did that, he would have just gone out there with them. He would have fought them. In fact, at one point, he says, I'm going to share this later, but if I was the king of this world, my servants would fight to protect me, but I'm not. It doesn't work like that. So he calls the Essenes and the Zealots out. He called out the corrupt Sadducees and the Herodians who had completely bought into the system. He says, you've given your soul to the Romans. That was your mistake. I don't care you giving your money, but you gave your soul. And the Pharisees, they were stuck in the middle. They couldn't make a decision. They were a mixed bag. So he just kept calling out their hypocrisy. The very first thing he says, give me a denarius. The Pharisee's like, oh, snap. I got one. From the very beginning, he calls out their hypocrisy. He calls them all out. Here are the three things that we have to bring into our second part in a moment, okay? This is what I want you to learn that applies to us now. Jesus refuses to do three things. He refuses political simplicity, he refuses political complacency, and he refuses political primacy. Let's talk about what these mean before we end out this part. I know it's going long. You guys are doing great. Stick with it. Political simplicity. The Jews try to put Jesus in a box. Is this right or not? Yes or no? Do we pay the tax? Do we revolt? Do we succumb? You know, Jesus was always amazingly clear when you asked him a question about your relationship with him, wasn't he? He's not ambiguous about that. He tells parables and stories, but I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Pretty clear. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off. People are like, whoa! Really clear, not ambiguous. But when he's asked questions about the state, he's ambivalent, he's nuanced, he's balanced. He's at times even paradoxical. He both tells you to resist and accept political answers to a dilemma. Pay the tax, but don't give your allegiance. Resist Caesar, don't resist Caesar. Acknowledge his rule, but don't worship him. He's genius. He says exactly what they needed to hear. Political simplicity, we're going to talk a lot about that in our second part. 2, he resists political complacency. Sorry, I forgot about this part. Political complacency. In what way? What does it mean to be complacent? It means you don't care. I don't care. But Jesus isn't complacent about politics. He doesn't say they don't matter, or else he would have just gone with the Essenes, right? Just go into the desert, preach to the people who get it. Politics and matters of state are a part of our lives, and Jesus understood that in a meaningful part of many of our lives. We can't just run away from it to build our own monastic community out in the middle of nowhere. How can we love our neighbor and minister to God's people if we run away? We can't run away. We can't be complacent. He rejects political complacency. And finally, he rejects political primacy. As we said before, while Jesus allows that politics are a reality of our life, he's clear that politics should not have primacy in our life. It should not be our primary vision. We shouldn't put our hope in mankind's solutions to mankind's problems because the problems of the world are deeply spiritual. They cannot be solved by worldly means. The problem of poverty or racism, this is a human problem because of sin. This is a spiritual issue. Man policies cannot fix those. Can they help? Sure. That's why they matter to a degree. Are they the solution? Of course not. And I don't think Christians can believe that and ever be joyful because you get wrapped up in the wrong stuff. Politics won't change the world. Jesus said, I don't fight like the world fights. Jesus was revolutionary, and there was no king like Jesus. Jesus, he says, I'm the revolutionary of all revolutionaries. He says, my revolution revolutionizes revolutionaries. Wow. My revolution is different than anything you've ever seen. It's different than anything you'll ever experience. You've never seen a king like me. You've never seen a kingdom like this. He says you're so caught up in solving spiritual problems man's way that you can't even see God's kingdom right here. God's king's right in front of you and you're blind because you're thinking about the politics. You're trying to get it around it. You're trying to make it work with Rome and Yahweh, and it can't. It doesn't work like that. You can't do it. He was a king without a penny to his name. He had to ask for a quarter. Whoa, poor his whole life. Especially the last 3 years. He was a king without a bed. Foxes have holes and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. He was poor. He was a king who wouldn't be elected, but he'd be executed. A king who didn't seek power, but gave it away. A king who subverted idolatry, not with violence or corruption or running away, but with self-sacrificial love. I can follow that guy. That's the kind of king he was. And we're going to pick up there in 5 minutes with our revolution. Take a break, get some water, go to the restroom. We'll be right back. All right, been making your way back in here? Gonna start about 30 seconds. Come back in for the brave who stayed. The second part will be shorter. Now that we've set the stage and we know where we're headed, let's get all the way there, shall we? Let's talk about the things that we really need to talk about. So I got a text in between saying, is there any way we can get these notes? If anybody wants them, what I'll do is I'll figure it out. I don't have a plan. I'll talk to Jared. Maybe we can throw them on the website or something like that. I can put an outline together because I know that stuff is hard to take notes on. I had this one professor in my medieval Italy class, and I did take a medieval Italy class. But that's not the only medieval class I took. I took many. And he would just talk for an hour. It was fascinating, but I couldn't keep up. And so if you're watching on live stream or you're there, we'll try to give you something that is meaningful that you can kind of chew on later. Okay, so now that we have that set, now that we see Jesus' revolution, let's talk about our revolution, okay? Let's just talk for a second about the current reality. I'll tell you something. I want so badly to one day have a kind and respectful political debate amongst two party members. I would love that. I hope I live to see it. I honestly don't know if I will. I would love that if we learn how to respect each other like that, because whether you vote independent, whether you vote Democrat, whether you vote Republican, whether you vote Green Party, whether you choose not to vote and you're loud about that, or you choose not to vote and you remain silent, it's a lose-lose, lose-lose-lose. Anybody else feel that way? There's nothing you can decide to do where someone doesn't think you're a lunatic for doing it. There's no direction you can go where someone doesn't think, how can you be a Christian and have a brain and vote that direction? No matter what you choose. That's going to happen to you. And we have, as a culture, lost the ability to disagree with each other and still respect one another's opinions. If individuals maybe can do it, but as a culture, we've completely lost this art. So how, in such a heated time, we are less than 2 weeks away from what is already the most controversial election in history. And in my life, we've already had some pretty controversial ones. It's going to keep being this way because not just of the personalities involved, but just what's happened to our country and where we're at and what God's allowed to happen. So how should disciples respond in this place? What do we do? How do we treat each other when we have different thoughts and opinions? Do we talk about it? Do we not talk about it? We're going to really draw on what we learned about Jesus' stance to inform our decisions now, okay? So how much should the Christian care about politics? Should it matter who we vote for or if we vote at all? What political party would Jesus have been a part of? What if you don't really support an entire platform, but you vote more on the basis of what issues matter to you? Is that wrong? Is that right? How should you vote if you vote? People are concerned with politics. Many of us are concerned with politics because we want change. Not just for us, but for others. Not everyone engaged in politics is a self-centered bum, right? Many people involved in politics want change, and that's how they think it's going to get done. People want revolution. They want change. They want radical change this way or that way. But there are different opinions on what should change, on how those things should change, and on why they should change. So let's start by talking about our allegiance. Turn in your Bibles to John chapter 18. We're going to skip ahead here. I mentioned this earlier. To this, really, it's kind of like going to the most important part of a movie. If you just jump in the middle of this and you don't know what's going on, you're going to be very confused. Because Jesus is on trial, and before he gets flogged in order to be crucified, Pilate brings him aside, and he has this conversation with him. And starting in verse 33 of John 18. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Well, there it is. Straight up. Are you who these people are saying you are? Because if so, that's a problem for me. I'm a Roman governor. Please say no. Jesus says, "Is that your own idea? Or did others talk to you about me?" What? Jesus is like, who's saying this right now? Like, is this you? Or who? Maybe you've been in that situation before. Pilate gets defensive. Am I a Jew? Your own people and the chief priests handed you over to me. What is it that you did? Jesus says, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." "You are a king then," said Pilate. And Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king." And then he drops a bomb on him. "In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to who? To Jesus." Whoa, and then Pilate's like, "What is truth?" I don't know what his attitude is there, but he's just like, "Whoa, I wasn't expecting this today." This is crazy. Which revolution has your allegiance? That is the question that Jesus asks people time and again. Which revolution has your allegiance? Who has the monopoly on truth? Should we embrace political simplicity? Right and wrong, black and white attitude about the way party lines are formed? Should we simply ignore it all and embrace political complacency? Just forget about it. Don't think about it. While you're at it, don't pay taxes. See if the IRS gets you. They probably will. I wouldn't encourage the S scene within America. Do we actively resist the power? Do we fight the man? Do we act like politics are going to change the world like we want it to be changed and embrace political primacy? Do we put our hope in politics, giving it first priority in our lives? I think it's important to know if you've given your allegiance to something. And let me give you, this is not from some like epic scholar. These are just my 3 ideas on when you maybe can have a clue that you've given your allegiance to worldly means of solving spiritual problems. 1, if you agonize over America's political future, I think it's probably an indicator that you've given your allegiance to the idea that politics are going to change the problems we all see. You agonize. It means you probably embraced political primacy too strongly. If you're depressed and overwhelmed when the candidate you want isn't chosen, the way many people felt when Trump was elected 4 years ago. I mean, there was panic, depression. Maybe some people in here felt it. If that's how we respond, if we feel, what's going to happen to my children's children? Like what's going to happen to us? If that's how you respond, I think you need to consider that you may have embraced the wrong allegiance. And you may be concerned about the wrong things. Number 2, if you feel the need to aggressively argue your point of view to get across why you're right and why your method will win, I'm going to go ahead and forward the idea that you may have embraced the wrong allegiance. We're going to talk more about this in a second because I think there's a place for debate, and I think there's a place for honest conversation about things. But I think there's never a place for the kind of thing I'm talking about. I think we all know what I'm saying. If you respond in anger and you vent that frustration and you attack others for their political stances, if you call them stupid and dumb and foolish, maybe you've embraced the wrong allegiance. And finally, when you're consumed by media and the news, when you just can't turn the TV off, you can't stop scrolling through Facebook for all that fun. And, Facebook just in flames, right? It's crazy right now. When you're consumed by it and you're thinking about it, I'm going to forward the idea that maybe your allegiance is in the wrong place. Let's take a moment to go after this idea that a true Christian should vote this way or that way, because I think it's part of the problem right now. Like, for people to say, like, how could you vote for them? How can you have a functioning adult brain and be a Christian and vote for that human being? And the thing is, I'm not just talking about one of the 2 candidates. We both know I'm talking about both, because you hear it about both. You hear it about Trump and you hear it about Biden. And you hear about everybody else. Not just, you hear about senators, you hear about Congress people, the whole deal. It's all over the place. Let me prove to you that you cannot speak to each other like that. that it's in fact not something that Jesus would have done. The early church was extremely countercultural. And I'm going to share with you 5 pillars of their countercultural movement and why they were so, people didn't understand them. Number 1 is they were incredibly diverse, unbelievably multi-ethnic. Read in Acts 2, we're not going to go there now. Acts 2, the first 9 verses, it's the crazy collection of people. A lot of them, I mean, their synagogue church services must have been crazy. They needed like 50 translators. It was just like, where are you from? Like, it's just like, I don't even know. It was crazy. It was so diverse. They were different in that way. They were very concerned about God's desire for sexuality. In Rome, when you think about sexual revolution that's happening in our country now, this is not the first time this has happened. It was all over. Rome is actually a good comparison for us on how sexuality was changing and in a way sort of evolving on what was right and what was wrong, what was accepted and not. Christians in the early church were deeply concerned about God's look and version of what sexuality should be. They were very concerned for the poor. Remember what we preached about a couple weeks ago? The poor were the nothings, the left for dead. If you were poor, you were cursed by the God. Good luck. Now, you have these Christians who elevate the poor, who say, you're the kingdom of God. People were like, what are these crazy people doing? Well, and they're going around looking for people to sell their stuff to, right? They're getting money together from all over the known world and sending it to the poor people in these cities. Craziness. Nothing like this ever been seen. They were incredibly concerned for babies and infants. So one thing that was horrible was that in Rome, if you had a baby that had a defect in any way, Romans what they'd often do is they would take the baby and they'd lay it down by a stream and they'd walk away, hoping that the baby would roll into the river and drown because they thought it was the most humane way to kill them. It's called infanticide, the killing of babies. And Christians were known, this is like my favorite thing, my favorite piece of history. Christians were known for actively searching, finding those children and raising them as their own. Talk about a good day. Talk about a good life, a little bit of treasure in heaven for you. Oh, I found this child by the river about to get eaten by an animal, and I took it home and I raised this child as my own. Oh, Christians are awesome. I love it. They were non-retaliatory. Christians were extreme pacifists in this time. By the way, this is not a comment on whether the military is right or wrong. It's a very complex issue. I don't think there's an easy answer. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying these Christians were extreme because they weren't a part of the Roman army. And that's, again, very complex. I'm not even someone who's opposed to being in the military. I'm just telling you this is how they work. It's very pacifism? That's a no-no. So if we try to make a decision on these 5 things we saw, and we vote on party lines, where would we land? So what I'm going to do here is I'm painting with an intentionally broad brush. You got to stick with me. You can't just say that all Democrats are this way and all Republicans. Of course not. We're all humans with individual thoughts and minds and hearts and experiences. What I'm telling you is, generally speaking, when you think about those topics, where would you vote? Where most Americans think off the top of their head, I should probably vote that direction. Well, if you cared more about the diversity or the multi-ethnic or equality, you're probably mostly going to vote Democrat. Probably. Will all vote? No. Does that mean Republicans don't like diversity? No, of course not. Of course there are people that vote Republican that love diversity, want equality. But are you guys with me on that? Like, generally speaking, that's the direction you're going to go. What about concern for sexuality? What if you really feel like I need to uphold God's standard of the Bible for what's right and what's wrong? Now, this is a touchy one, but probably, most likely, if you have a more conservative view on that, you're probably more comfortable voting Republican. Probably. Concern for the poor. That's one of the platforms, Democrat platform. Doesn't mean the Republicans don't care about it, but they think about it very differently. But if you're thinking, if the most important thing in my spiritual life is helping poor people, you're probably going to vote Democrat. Probably. And then what about concern for infants? You guys probably saw where I was going with the last one. you're almost certainly going to vote Republican on that. Doesn't mean Democrats hate babies, right? In fact, we keep birthing babies on both sides of party lines, so it's working out. My point is that if you just think about that, what do? You're probably going to vote this way. Non-retaliatory, neither. And then if you were to throw in the environment, which a lot of people care about, and there is a biblical precedent for, read the first couple chapters of Genesis, right? Caring for the earth, there's Christian movements about this. Maybe you vote Green Party. You're like, yeah, Green Party, maybe you vote independent or libertarian or something else, right? And so what's the point? I'm not going to tell you which way to vote tonight because I can't. Because Jesus didn't. He was given this option. What should I do? And he was like, yes and no. And they were like, duh. I didn't see that coming. Political simplicity doesn't work. Not if you're a Christian. Why? Because no political party fits neatly into the Christian worldview. And let me say it a different way. No political party has a monopoly on biblical truth. Only Jesus can claim that. And he did. In John 18, we just read it. Everyone on the side of truth listens to the Republicans, the Democrats, to Jesus. And this isn't just like an easy answer. I think sometimes with politics, it's like, just follow Jesus. That doesn't really help the thinking politician. Like, just think about Jesus. Well, I am trying to think about Jesus. I just think Jesus would do this. But we have an example in the Bible where he didn't make that choice, and he could have. He could have done it, and he didn't. There are a lot of reasons for that. One is that politics are far too nuanced to put it in a box. You can't do it. And even when you take the 5 pillars of some of the early Christian thought, you're split right down the middle. How do you do it? What do we do with that? Only one revolution should hold our complete allegiance, and it's not a man-made one. We can't say Jesus would have voted this or that because Jesus didn't say it, so don't put words in Jesus' mouth because he didn't do it. Trying to change the world through man-made ideas, policies, and political parties is kind of like trying to rearrange your furniture in your house. What's my point? Can change happen? Yes, it can. That's why I don't think we should avoid political complacency. Should we have people that care about politics? I certainly hope that they're Jesus followers in politics, or God help us. We need people who care. But it's a little like just moving stuff around. Doesn't it feel that way? We're all worked up at this election, and we're going to be worked up again in 4 years, and we're going to be worked up again in 8 years, and just keep doing the math. 12, 16, 20, 24, 28, 32, 36, 40. I could keep going maybe. I'm eventually going to miss it. That one's for Caleb. Your whole life, it's always going to be dramatic. Why? Because to people whose allegiance is to politics, it is dramatic. It's everything. Why do you think people are out there waving their signs around and putting bumper stickers over everything? I go on prayer walks down my street and it's like Biden, Trump, Biden, Trump, Biden, Trump. I'm like, oh my goodness. Where's the end? It's like, where's that one random one? And then there's all these random signs. People make new signs that just say mean things about each other. Right across our street, there's a Biden sign and a Trump sign. And the Biden sign's on this side, actually. And the Trump guy put it up later, and he put lights on it. It's actually very well lit. They did a good job with their angles. Kristen was like, oh, that's well lit. I was like, yeah, I feel uncomfortable with it, but it is well lit. I just feel uncomfortable with this relationship. Like, do they talk to each other? Like, are they like, hey, or is it just like, oh, I hate you? Like, what is that like? It's so weird, like Black Lives Matter, all lives matter, Black Lives Matter, all lives matter, sign with Martin Luther King, other sign with random person, I don't know, but it says this thing that's really controversial. And it's just like, whoa, that's where we're at. There's a reason those signs are in the yard, and it's because their allegiance, their hope is in man's ideas. How horrible is that? To have your hope, hoping that man makes the right choice, hoping that America chooses right. America's never going to choose right. That's not going to work because what's right is subjective in politics. It's nuanced. It's complex. It's not going to solve the world's problems. It changes this way. It changes back that way. Is it possible that two genuine people that are honestly sincere and intelligent and kind can arrive at two different conclusions about important things? Absolutely. And I think the fact that we have a hard time embracing that gives us real trouble. when we think about this. You know, I think that when our allegiance shifts to Jesus or back to Jesus, our perspective on politics will shift as well. What do I mean? I'm younger, so I'm not saying like 100% sure this is true, but generally what I've seen is that as people shift their allegiance to God, they become more balanced in the way they think about politics and less extreme. The one who has ignored politics, which is honestly more me, I'm more Essene in that way, right? Like that's my nature, is to be like, I don't care, I'm just going to go do the Jesus thing, and I can be kind of self-righteous about it sometimes. Well, I'm just going to go study the Bible. Well, that is true, I am doing that, and that's probably a better thing to do in some circumstances, but it's not the only right decision. I can only speak for myself in that way. The one who has ignored it maybe starts to care more because they see two things. One, that their brothers and sisters care deeply, many of them, and honestly think change can happen. And two, there's historical proof that change can happen. It's rearranging the furniture, but sometimes it makes all the difference. It doesn't make the ultimate difference, but it can make a difference. The one who leans real hard to the right probably comes a little more to the middle when they realize, oh, it's more complicated than I thought. Or when my allegiance is to Jesus, I just am less stressed about it, and I find people move a little bit more. I'm not making a claim for middle of the road's the way to go. I'm just saying in general, I see people, the edge comes off on both sides, and they're less concerned about who's voted where. They care, and they'll vote one way or another way. They'll vote their conscience, they'll vote whatever, but then if it doesn't happen their way, you know what, they're all right, because they're kind of more concerned about saving souls than saving policies, right? They're more concerned about actually helping poor people rather than just voting to help poor people, right? That's the difference of Jesus. Jesus is like, go do it. You can vote for it too, but go do it. That's why Jesus made a difference. He didn't just talk about it, he actually went and did it. Are we that way too? When we give our allegiance to God, we recognize both sides absolutely have merit. And both sides, many people are trying to do good things. It's not all corruption. It's not all Sadducees, all right? There are good people in there trying to do, and there are different agendas, yes, but you can't speak to those. We don't know those. God knows those. And he's let it happen. The Christian understands that no one party has a monopoly on truth, and therefore seeks to understand both sides of the equation, recognizing that in the end, politics will never bring about our revolution. Only Jesus can do that. Only Jesus can do that. So don't put your hope in politics, because it'll crush you. It will divide us. Can you care about it? Absolutely. People should care about it. Thank God people care about it. But should it own your life? Should it be given primacy in your life? No. My last point of the night. You guys are almost there. Right there. This is it. A unified kingdom, not a uniform one. Turn your Bibles to Ephesians chapter 4. And we're going to look at unity and uniformity. This is one of the most important things we need to look at tonight and kind of close it out. We're going to read together. When I find the right, there it is. All right, here we go. Ephesians 4, starting in verse 1. As a prisoner for the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. This is an important scripture. The kingdom of God is not like any other kingdom. There's nothing like it. Jesus does not seek to stick us all into the same mold so that we look the same, act the same, talk the same, and think the same. Though recently the church has been rightly criticized in some ways for this. We're actively trying to transform that. 1 Corinthians 12, don't turn there. Many of you know the verse. Talks about how we're one body with many parts. And each part is uniquely suited to enhance the whole picture. Right? A piece of art generally isn't a masterpiece if it's one color. Generally. And there's one art guy in there that's like, well, I saw this one Picasso. You know, it's like, okay, you know what I'm saying? Like, a masterpiece requires many shades, many colors, many differences. There is no body without many parts. All are required and essential for the masterpiece to function as the master intended. What is uniformity? Uniformity means we're all the same. We're no different. We're all the same, but we're not the same. And trying to squeeze everyone into the same mold hinders unity. It destroys our diversity, and it squashes all but the one voice that we uphold. Unity is not uniformity. If we all look the same, sound the same, have the same opinions on disputable matters, are we really the body of Christ? I would forward no. And that includes politics. In John chapter 17, Jesus in a prayer says this, I pray that all of them, he's talking about us, may be one, just as you are in me and I am in you. Whoa, Jesus' standard of unity is kind of high. I want us, he said he wants us to be one like God and Jesus are one. Whoa, okay. That's a high calling. How do we do that? He wants complete unity, intimate unity. How do we get there? We can't get there by trying to be uniform. He tells us how to get there in Ephesians 4. Look what he says. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. We must listen to one another. We must respect one another's opinions. Be humble. We're commanded to be clothed in humility and gentleness in Colossians 3. Are you characterized by your humility, even in the political conversations? Are you humble? Do you know how to listen? Or do people know that it's a worthless attempt to talk to you? Worthless, because you won't listen anyway. You're so entrenched in what you believe that you can't see anything else. You're so angry that you can't see past it. And you've forgotten your allegiance anyway. Because you know what the Bible says about your anger clouding your judgment and in your anger to not sin. Are you a listener or are you a talker? He says then, be patient and bear with one another in love. We must listen to each other, respect each other. We must start conversations from a point of trust. That I trust your motives and your sincerity and that you've thought about this. You know, I don't have a problem with people talking about politics. I care how you talk about politics because it proves where your allegiance is. And then finally it says, make every effort to keep this unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. I just want to talk, we can't end without talking about social media. Because in our unbelievably passive-aggressive society, we can say all kinds of mean things on social media and be super happy each other face to face. And it's so weird and messed up. Here's the thing. Your online presence should reflect your true allegiance. If your online presence acts as a tool of division, you should say nothing. And that is biblical, and I'm about to prove it from the Bible. But if you can espouse an idea in a reasonable manner, offering people thoughtful, measured, balanced arguments to consider, creating a loving, mutually respectful dialogue, I say that's good and God bless you. And we need those people to populate Facebook. But let's be real, that's not happening. But how different would our conversation about Facebook would be so different if the Jesus thinking was there. But it's not there because we're so angry and where our allegiances, we're so dedicated. We care so much about the wrong things. It's not going to change the world. You're just going to move the couch to the other side of the room. Only Jesus can do that using us. Don't just vote for it, do it. If you don't have the self-control to share your convictions and political beliefs without engaging in the meaningless, time-wasting, divisive, ungodly arguments online, say nothing, because reckless words pierce like a sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. Say nothing, because it's by your words you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned. It's the words of Jesus. And because those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongue, they deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. Is that enough verses for you? There's a lot more. We're like way out of time. You don't need any more because we all know it's true. You're hurting your reputation. You're hurting Jesus' reputation. You're impacting the way people view the church. You're impacting the way people view Christendom in general. You are a part of the reason we are so often called hypocrites. That's what we do when we feed that beast. That's what we do. We crush what Jesus is trying to do. Jesus avoided political simplicity, complacency, and primacy, and I think that we should follow his example. And that's never been more important than right now. Where is your true allegiance? Don't forget that it's to Jesus. Do not give your allegiance to Caesar. Don't give it to politics. Don't give it to man's way. Give it to Jesus. And what that means, honestly, is something different for probably each of us to a certain degree when it's about politics. How should you vote? You have to decide how you vote when your allegiance is to Jesus or if you vote. And you know what? It's okay to keep that to yourself if you want. It's okay to say it. But how you say it, just remember, the moment it comes out of your mouth, God is listening too. And there are some pretty clear scriptures from Jesus on how we are treated with his words. We need to make every effort to do what you know is true that Jesus would do and never do what he wouldn't. That is all that matters. Our allegiance is to Jesus. Amen. You made it all the way. We have a lot probably to think about, to pray about. Some of you are just like, amen. You're fine. You don't have to think about anything. Others may be struggling with the idea of what I'm saying, maybe even offended. But I really tried to help you see that this is the evidence we have on how Jesus responded to this stuff. And if we're honestly doing that, I think that we're clear before God. So seems appropriate to pray together. Great job. You made it through the politics workshop. We'll pray, and then we'll have a great evening together, okay? All right, let's pray. Amen.